of the Oregon stakeholders in these meetings, closed-door meetings, and I guarantee it wasn't a very pleasant experience most 99% of the time. Kind of what you're going through right now, I think. Yours is much more accelerated than mine ever was, I guarantee you that. One of the conversations that oftentimes, not oftentimes, but more than once or probably about 4 times I can remember in those closed-door meetings was, and I want to know if you saw this in any of the documentation that you watched or looked at in the science, the scenario of taking out the 4 dams, the 4 lower dams, they openly said they would still have to truck the fish around Keno Dam and the Keno Reach and the Keno Reservoir and put them into the Klamath Lake. So the logical question was, why don't they trap them at Iron Gate and truck them up once? Leave the dams in place. I mean, that was the question I kept asking, and I never got an answer from them. Did you find that in the same kind of information in all the science that's there?
Yeah, leaving the Keno Dam above these 4 hydro dams really didn't make any sense to me either. But it also didn't make any sense to not just truck the fish around all 5 dams rather than letting them, catching them at the Keno. So all I can think, the only answer I can think of for that is the 68 miles of river reach that is between Iron Gate and Keno. But it's the hundreds of miles above that I think they're really trying to sell us on in terms of the agreements. Again, another one of those things that doesn't make scientific sense.
Dr. Houser, you mentioned being interested in having congressional hearings, which we think would be a good idea too. We might be able to help you in this process. Tom McClintock, Congressman McClintock, who's the chairman of the Energy Committee, is an outspoken critic of the removal of the dams. And in fact, recently he prevented an approximately $800 million fund that was to be used to start that process. He single-handedly, along with another committee member, stood in the way of that. So he is certainly a friend to us in preventing the removal of the dams, and I think he might be interested in speaking with you either on the committee level or individually.
I would welcome that. I think that's a way forward when people in power can actually listen to these things and make things happen. I think that's their responsibility, and I think we should push for a hearing.
I wonder, there's a new book out by Department of Fish and Game and Caltrans, and they have a plan of shutting down the whole Oregon and all the mountains in Northern California. And I was wondering if you are aware of this, that their plan is to not have people living in the mountains and in the areas. And one way, possibly, is to take the water away from the farmers, which they're trying to do, and move on with their program. Do you know anything about this book and what is it is out? It's a printed book. It is something you should look into because it's the government trying to take away our land.
I'm not aware. I haven't read that book. I'd certainly be interested in looking at it. But I'm also not into conspiracy theories. I'm trying to, look at the science and look at the facts. So maybe there are facts there. I'd certainly be open to looking at them.
I've got a question, and I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, John.
I heard you talk yesterday at Klamath Falls. Would you share a little bit about the background of your boss, as far as where she came from?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. So, as part of the whole in the press releases, there was a few press release or journalists who dug out the background of my boss at Reclamation. So it turns out that she worked for Trout Unlimited as a lobbyist for 10 years before being appointed to Reclamation. And it also turns out that Trout Unlimited is a signer on the dam removal agreements. So legally, I think she should have recused herself of anything to do with decision making on this. I've actually raised this with the Office of Inspector General, who don't seem to be taking any action on it. So that concerns me, because I think that actually could be a criminal issue.
I now like to make my comment. Several months ago, Sheriff Lope arranged for a citizens committee to meet with the new director of Fish and Game, Chuck Bottom. John had to be down to Ventura that day, after we heard, so under Sheriff Batts arranged to have us have a conference with the new director of Fish and Game. At the end of his presentation, which was almost totally focused only on Siskiyou County, he voluntarily made the statement that the Fish and Game Commission had just reversed the Fish and Game recommendation of changing the regulations on striped bass management down the Delta to help the Delta smelt. And what they did, for those of you that live down that part of the country, where I grew up in Sacramento, the regulations for striped bass forever, as long as I lived, you couldn't keep fish under 18 inches, or maybe 22, and you could catch 2 per day. Well, Fish and Game came up with a regulation to help the striped bass. They're going to let you catch 12 a day, down to 12 inches. Anyway, at the end of Bonham's conference with us, and there were 20 people around the room, many of them are here today. In fact, one member of our Siskiyou water users next door right here has a recording of this meeting. Anyway, I'll finish up quickly here. The important part about this is Bonham's told us that the striped bass fishermen got in an uproar about the decimation of the striped bass. And that's what was the reason why the Fish and Game Commission put thumbs down on Fish and Game's suggestion of this new regulation of easy catch of lots of stripers. We happen to have an author of a paper that was done. He's right over here, Tom Cannon, who I work with quite a bit here in the Valley. He and a former colleague of mine, Dr. Peter Boyle at UC Davis, documented that if the stripers were removed from the Delta, there were 27 other predatory fish that would decimate the Delta smelt. If that new regulation were done, catching 12 inches, down to 12 inches, 12 per day. So Cannon and Boyle presented the correct science, and our new damn Fish and Game guy, who had spent 10 years as an attorney for Trout Unlimited before he got director of Fish and Game, he voluntarily lied to us on a completely aberrant topic, the Delta, while he was up here. And I walked out, he's kind of a little guy, and I'm a big guy, I walked up to him, I said, "Mister, you're a goddamn liar."
One question that was asked me, if the water users or any groups here would like to do a Freedom of Information Act, what documents should we be asking for? Is that something you can answer?
I thought about that in terms of my own case, but I think we should probably strategize on that if you want to look into that, because I think we have quite a few documents in different areas that we could request, and it would help our case.
And my question is, if the removal of the dams contaminate the river, and for a number of years, all the way down to the ocean, which I'm assuming it will do, how does that affect the land surrounding the rivers?
I can only speculate. I haven't done a study on that. But the sediments could accumulate to quite deep levels. Also, the sediments are quite fine and could blow around. So they could, in fact, contaminate the land around the river somewhat. Also, the fluctuations in river flow will be much higher, so you'll get more sediment deposited on the banks and may hang around for a while. So it probably won't affect the land very far away from the river, but the river itself will be pretty contaminated for quite a while.